In a world where power and money rule, one family rose above the rest. No, it's not a mafia movie, it's the true story of the Medici family. Wealthy bankers turned into rulers, puppet masters of art, politics, and even the papacy. The Medici didn't just hold influence, they practically invented it. Imagine Florence in the 1400s, a city bursting with energy, merchants lining the streets, artists drawing on every corner. Behind all this, there's a family whose power runs so deep that even the Pope owed them favours, lots of them. But the Medici's rise to power wasn't just about money. It was about intelligence, ruthlessness, and a flair for strategy. Today, we're peeling back the curtain on the Medici's secrets, scandals, and schemes. So grab your Florence passport and buckle up. This is how the Medici family ruled the Renaissance and crafted a legacy that would outlast them all. Our story kicks off with Giovanni de Medici, the unlikely mastermind behind the Medici fortune. Giovanni wasn't born into power. He was just a savvy banker with a knack for money and, a tiny obsession with staying out of trouble. A rare skill in a city brimming with political drama. So how did this modest banker lay the foundation for one of history's most powerful dynasties? Giovanni's genius was twofold. First, he didn't just open a bank. He created a network of Medici banks that stretched across Europe. Picture a medieval version of your favorite franchise. This meant that merchants, royals, and even the Pope could access Medici funds anywhere, making Giovanni's bank the go-to financial hub. And when the church labelled interest charging as sinful usury, Giovanni had an elegant solution. Instead of charging interest outright, he used a commission system, keeping both clients and clergy happy and keeping profits rolling in. But Giovanni's next move was even bolder. He didn't just look at money, he looked at power. He began funding the papacy. That's right, the Medici Bank became the Vatican's bank. And this wasn't just about money, it was an investment in influence. By the time Giovanni was finished, the Medici were practically untouchable. In Florence, they weren't royalty, but they were behind every decision made by anyone who mattered. For Giovanni, true power wasn't about titles, it was about relationships. His quiet strategy of funding the church, befriending the nobility, and supporting influential families laid the groundwork for the Medici to not only build wealth, but also amass influence that even kings couldn't buy. His legacy, a family destined to shape the Renaissance world from the shadows without needing a crown or throne. Now that the Medici Bank was thriving across Europe, it was time for Giovanni's son, Cosimo de Medici, to step into the spotlight. But Cosimo wasn't just a banker. He was a visionary with a taste for power. Imagine him like a Renaissance chess master, calculating, careful, and always a step ahead of his rivals. So, how did Cosimo use the family fortune to become the most powerful man in Florence? Cosimo wasn't interested in fame, he was interested in control. Rather than openly flaunting his influence, he preferred to operate from the shadows. This earned him a nickname, Cosimo the Elder, but don't let the title fool you. Behind that calm demeanour, Cosimo was as cunning as they came. In fact, he perfected a very Medici style of governance unofficial rule from behind the scenes. Who needed a throne when you could pull the strings of the people who sat on it? One of Cosimo's biggest moves was aligning himself with the Pope, making the Medici Bank practically untouchable. But with power came enemies. The Albizzi family, a rival clan, accused him of plotting against the Republic and had him exiled. But here's the twist. Instead of weakening him, Cosimo's absence threw Florence into chaos. The people soon realized the city needed him back. Within a year, Cosimo returned to Florence not as a mere banker, but as the city's de facto ruler. And with his return, the Medici influence grew even stronger. Cosimo's power wasn't just about money, it was about alliances. He gained the loyalty of artists, thinkers, and even the common people. Cosimo knew that while money was the Medici's ticket to power, loyalty was what kept them there. His return marked the start of a golden age for Florence, a city where the Medici's influence was just beginning to bloom. With Cosimo firmly in control, the Medici dynasty didn't just fund the Renaissance, they fueled it. Florence in the 15th century was bursting with talent, and Cosimo knew that art could be the Medici family's lasting legacy. But why art? Because nothing says I'm powerful quite like having your family's name etched into the cultural soul of a city. So Cosimo opened the family's coffers to painters, sculptors, and architects, turning Florence into a canvas of Medici greatness. This was more than a vanity project, it was a strategy. Through art, Cosimo could reshape Florence's image and elevate its reputation across Europe. He wasn't just hiring artists, he was creating icons. Take Filippo Brunelleschi, for instance, who designed the majestic dome of Florence's cathedral. That dome didn't just transform the skyline, it announced to the world Florence is a city of innovation, and the Medicis are its patrons. The family's investments weren't just beautiful, they were politically savvy moves that boosted Medici prestige. And it didn't stop there. Cosimo wasn't just funding buildings, he was supporting ideas. He poured money into intellectual circles, reviving ancient Greek and Roman texts and kickstarting a new wave of Renaissance thinking. It was like the Medici Bank became the fuel pump of creativity, enabling minds to think freely, scholars to write, and artists to break boundaries. Cosimo's money was the spark that set the Renaissance ablaze. The Medici family's patronage wasn't only about buildings and books, it was about crafting a lasting influence on Florence itself. By supporting talent, they carved a place for themselves not just in politics but in history. Every statue, every painting, every fresco bore the silent signature of Medici patronage, embedding their legacy into the very walls of Florence. And Cosimo's investments would soon pay off beyond his wildest dreams, because the next Medici would take this legacy to a whole new level. Enter Lorenzo de Medici, known by a name that suited him perfectly. Lorenzo the Magnificent. If Cosimo was the brains, Lorenzo was the charm. Charismatic, bold, and fiercely intelligent, Lorenzo knew how to turn his family's influence into something legendary. But his real power came not from money or politics. It came from his vision for a flourishing Florence. Lorenzo wasn't just a patron of the arts, he was a fan of it. He opened the Medici Palace to artists, poets, and philosophers, filling its halls with the brightest minds of the Renaissance. Imagine Botticelli, Michelangelo, and Leonardo da Vinci, all rubbing shoulders, exchanging ideas, sketching in the Medici gardens. Lorenzo's patronage wasn't just about funding masterpieces. It was about creating a community where creativity thrived. He saw art as a way to make Florence a beacon of culture, beauty, and intellect. But Lorenzo's charm couldn't protect him from rivals. The Pazzi family, one of Florence's wealthiest clans, hated the Medici's hold on the city. In 1478, they hatched a plot to assassinate Lorenzo and his brother Giuliano in a daring attempt to overthrow Medici control. On a quiet Easter Sunday, as the city gathered in Florence's cathedral, the Pazzi struck. Giuliano was killed, but Lorenzo managed to escape, barely. Enraged, Lorenzo retaliated swiftly, unleashing his allies to crush the Pazzi and secure Medici power over Florence once and for all. But for Lorenzo, victory came at a price. The assassination attempt changed him, and the challenges of rule took their toll. Still, he carried on, pouring himself into Florence's arts and architecture until the very end. By the time Lorenzo passed away in 1492, Florence had become the cultural epicenter of Europe. He left a city brimming with beauty and a Medici legacy that seemed unshakable. Yet, as powerful as the family had become, enemies were always waiting in the wings. With Lorenzo the Magnificent gone, the Medici family faced a new era, one filled with challenges from every corner. It didn't take long for Florence's enemies to sense an opportunity. The Medici had ruled through alliances, but also through fear, and now that their charismatic leader was gone, Florence's power dynamics grew complicated. One of the most infamous plots against the Medici was the Pazzi conspiracy, a name that would go down in Florence's dark history. As we mentioned, the Pazzi family had already tried and failed to overthrow Lorenzo, but other rivals still lurked in the shadows, hoping to dismantle the Medici grip on Florence. And their tactics? Let's just say they'd make even the most dramatic soap opera look tame. After Lorenzo's death, the Medici's political enemies grew bolder. Florence had factions constantly vying for power, and one of the biggest threats to Medici rule came from the Florentine Republic's own government officials. They resented the Medici's quiet control over the city and wanted Florence to return to a true republic, free from Medici influence. The Medici's response? Ingenious, cosmic almost. They didn't just fight back, they married into power. For example, Pope Leo VIII, a Medici, used his influence to protect the family's interests from Rome. Medici family members became cardinals and political leaders, bringing the church into Florence's affairs. But despite their clever schemes, these alliances brought the Medici closer to a dangerous enemy public opinion. People had grown weary of the family's control, and some began to see the Medicis as tyrants rather than protectors. This period became a high-stakes balancing act for the family. Political marriages, religious alliances, and strategic bribery kept them afloat, but Florence was changing. The Medici had secured a legacy, but they were beginning to realize that maintaining power might be even harder than gaining it. By the early 1500s, the Medici family's grip on Florence had begun to slip. Their influence was still strong, but it faced constant challenges, from both the people of Florence and their own internal struggles. The Medici had ruled from behind the scenes for so long, but a shift was coming, one that would eventually push them out of Florence altogether. As generations passed, the Medici lost some of their original cunning and unity. They still held wealth and powerful titles, but they also faced new kinds of pressure. One Medici, Pope Clement VII, tried to use his influence to restore the family's power, but he found himself caught in the middle of Europe's political and religious upheavals. Wars, shifting alliances, and the Protestant Reformation all put immense strain on the Medici's control. Florence was a changed city, and the Medici name no longer commanded the respect it once had. By the 18th century, the Medici family line had weakened, and the last Medici ruler, Gian Gastone, passed away in 1737 without an heir. With him, the Medici dynasty came to an end. But even though their power faded, the Medici left a lasting legacy, one that went beyond wealth and politics. They had transformed Florence into a Renaissance marvel, a city whose art and architecture still inspire the world today. The Medici may have left the stage, but their contributions to art, science and culture left an indelible mark. The Medici family showed the world that power could be wielded quietly, with influence rather than brute force. And their legacy continues to be felt every time we walk through a museum or gaze at a Renaissance masterpiece. So while the Medicis may no longer hold power, their influence lives on, echoing through history and reminding us that sometimes true power isn't about ruling, it's about leaving a legacy. And that's the story of the Medici, a family whose ambition, intelligence and influence transformed not just Florence but the world. They rose from modest beginnings to become the Renaissance's most powerful patrons, giving us some of the greatest masterpieces, most innovative architecture, and influential thinkers of all time. The Medici may be gone, but their legacy lives on, from the stunning dome of Florence's cathedral to the halls of museums worldwide. They showed us that power comes in many forms, and sometimes the most enduring influence is the one built on ideas, art, and culture. So, if you enjoyed this dive into the world of Renaissance power plays and the incredible Medici legacy, don't forget to hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel for more fascinating stories from history and leave a comment below. What do you think? Could the Renaissance have thrived without the Medici family, or were they the magic behind the masterpiece?